the sufficient decentralization post. It's crazy how misunderstood that is. We've heard so many, I just think, stupid arguments around it's like you're not decentralized, when the reality is like it will be actually one of the only social protocols out there that have two significant apps with like, reasonable number of users every day that are actually using it. Because I think most other apps or decentralized social approaches basically have one app.
We spend a lot of time worrying about like the decentralization aspect, which I think turned out to be the easier problem. Like the hardest thing is building something that people care to spend their time on.
The lesson we've learned there is like, who cares? It's a participation trophy in some ways. It's like you actually need to drive user growth, because that's actually how you get to an actual protocol that matters, is you have enough people using it that it matters and actually creates the flywheel for more apps to want to integrate.
Welcome back to the Slow Hunch podcast. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome Dan Romero and Varun Srinivasan, the founders of Farcaster. Farcaster is a really interesting project. It's a social network, but it's not just an app. It's a new type of social network rebuilt from the bottom up as an open protocol that is fully programmable, fully open, and fully crypto native, meaning that every account also has built-in support for digital assets and really is a wallet under the hood. And that combination of things leads to some really interesting possibilities and something that's really different structurally from all the social networks that have come before it. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation with Dan and Varun. Well, thank you for coming on today. I've been looking forward to this. Maybe for starters, you could just introduce yourselves. And I think for a lot of folks who are listening or watching, they may not know what Farcaster is. So maybe also explain what Farcaster is and who you are in relation to it.
Sure. So Dan Romero, I'm one of the two co-founders of Farcaster.
I'm Varun, one of the other founders of Farcaster. Dan and I have actually worked together for a long time. We both spent almost 5 years together at Coinbase, and then we started Farcaster, which has been another 5-year journey since.
Yeah, Farcaster is a social network, and it's also a protocol. And so we've been working on that for the last 5 years, and there have been twists and turns along the way. Happy to cover that today. But I think today you could say it's a social network focused for people interested in crypto. And from a protocol standpoint, everything is pretty much programmable. So we've kind of spent the last 5 years building out all what we call developer Legos. So kind of any part of the stack as a developer, you kind of have permissionless access to both read the data and kind of write and build anything you want on the network, which for anyone who's tried using the X Twitter API recently is very much not the case.
When you think of the journey that you've been on or the sort of slow hunt you've been pursuing over the years, including building Farcaster, but maybe even before that, like how would you characterize it?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I joined Coinbase in 2014. I wasn't particularly interested in crypto, to be honest. I think the thing that I was most interested in moving to Silicon Valley was I wanted to work on kind of like consumer products that reached massive scale. To me, that's the most interesting stuff that Silicon Valley builds is this kind of like at scale, the type of app that everyone can go use. And I think that was an early sign in 2014 was that people potentially, the next mobile is crypto and specifically Bitcoin. That ended up being completely wrong. But USV invested in that round, and I think that there was very much promise in the air that Bitcoin is going to kind of be this new platform and money can move around programmably, and like this is the kind of next wave. Ended up being a completely different journey. I think actually my 5 years at Coinbase felt very much more like learning about finance and then the intersection with technology and consumer apps, right? Because Coinbase is kind of the easy way to come on. But I think that was always in the back of my mind is the reason I was excited about working technology was to work on something at scale and a product that everyday people could use. Now, to be clear, Coinbase is a 100 million customers today, and my parents both have Coinbase accounts, and so like it is a product that I think has reached scale. But I think one critique of crypto that has always bothered me is till about now, which we can talk about a little later. I think it's really not been super appealing for the average person, because really the only thing you could do in crypto is speculate. And I don't say that as like a dirty word. It was the reality. So 5 years at Coinbase, learned a lot, worked with Varun, and then 2020 kind of had a bunch of time in my hands. I had left Coinbase, pandemic, and I think started think about stuff to go work on, and had a chance to reconnect with Varun, and we started working through ideas. And we actually still have them. It's kind of weird. We like have a Notion section of like the ideas that we went through. I looked at it the other day. There were some of them were really, really bad ideas. But we were exploring DeFi and just kind of like, could we build something together? And I think both of us actually were interested in working on a protocol. And it's specifically this idea that working on something that, if it works, can be used by a lot of people, but also kind of is permissionless and composable and all these kind of really nice properties of crypto. And you don't explicitly have to be crypto for it, but I do think that there's this really nice thing to say. It's like, I helped build this standard that now the world runs on, right? Like the World Wide Web, email.
Yes.
I think those are two really powerful examples that, frankly, we haven't had many happen between kind of the early Web 1 stuff and then crypto as Web 3. You can argue whether that's true, but like I think Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then probably Solana, and then things like Uniswap, like those are real protocols that are actually completely adopted globally, at least by a set of people. And as a developer, you can kind of build on this shared system, and it actually works. And so I think that was very much what Varun and I were interested in working on. And then I think ultimately we picked this direction of, can we build a decentralized version of Twitter as a protocol?
I think most people don't really realize how fundamental technology protocols are to the functioning of everything, right? And if you can build something that becomes one of the small handful of protocols that powers like all of the world and all of the internet, that's like a pretty ambitious and pretty amazing idea. And it's really different than building like an app or a company or a traditional product. Varun, how about you? Like you landed at Coinbase right around the same time that Dan did, in the sort of 2014, 2015 era. But what brought you there, and what got your, gears turning, about all this?
So I think the origin for me, and actually for Dan as well, started a lot earlier in college, where both of us independently were building apps on social APIs. I was working on a Facebook app that like went viral for a little bit in my college, which helped students find free food. So you could just like build this calendar of all the places where you could eat pizza, and like everyone loved it, and people just jumped on it and were populating it. Dan also, I think, did something on Twitter with the polls API, and actually built like a polling app. And I think that was like the magic era of social, where like it finally clicked for
Right.
people that you could get incredible distribution for consumer applications by building on this graph and like finding out what your friends were using. And that was very exciting. I was like super fired up to go work on that. But even while I was still at college, over a couple of years, this is like 2006 to 2010, it became obvious that we were moving away from that vision. And we were getting to a point where APIs were getting more locked down. Apps are becoming more extractive in terms of wanting to control the client experience, wanting to control all the distribution, and Zane and others had like a very tough road from then on out. So when I kind of went to start my first company, I thought about social, but it didn't seem like the right fit, and so I pursued the consumer idea. Actually, went and built something in hardware in a very different space, focused on people with hearing loss. We did that for a couple of years. I think ultimately, like, hardware was going through a bit of a renaissance in 2014, and it seemed like a cool way to get back to consumer, but didn't end up working out. And one of our investors, Gary, who's now at YC, connected me to Coinbase, and so ended up getting very excited about actually both crypto and AI at the time. The challenge with AI was there wasn't a lot of consumer stuff you could do with it. It was mostly SaaS
Right.
businesses. So I was taking almost a very different fork into crypto, which I didn't really think had any link back to social. And so, overlapped with Dan. We spent 5 years there building a bunch of stuff in crypto, focusing on like more economic access, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then all the different assets that came after. And I think it was much later when we reconnected. Reconnected is Dan's polite phrasing of it. It was I bugged him every month for a year until he finally said yes. And then it wasn't until we started kicking around ideas, like Dan was still very excited about social. And for me, it was like trudging up this old memory of stuff I like to work on. But it was like the first idea we found that felt like it had really good founder market fit, where both of us had like strong positive experiences with it. We're really excited about it. And the technology felt like it was there. Like 2013, I looked around at social, looked around at Diaspora and a bunch of the other things that people are building, and it didn't quite feel like it was going to work. But now it felt like we were at a different inflection point with where distributed systems and a lot of these other primitives were to be able to build this.
How early do you think you started gestating some of the ideas that ultimately led to Farcaster?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's hard to remember this period for I think most people in crypto because they're so new to crypto relative to that period. But we were a Bitcoin company. Like we didn't like it was like everything else was either called an altcoin or 4-letter word coin. And like I think the big moment for us was Brian actually went to China and tried to negotiate with like the mining groups to increase the block cap on Bitcoin from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes. Like that was like the big drama at the time. And we had gone sideways for all of 2015, and this is now 2016. Nothing was working. And Brian kind of came back remember Brian was very much a Bitcoin person and was like, I don't think that they're ever going to do anything with Bitcoin. And I think at the same time, you had people like Olaf, who was still at Coinbase, Fred, who I think Olaf had pilled a bit, and even people like Linda G. I don't even know where you were on the stack of Ethereum interest, Varun, but like I remember those are the type. And Linda now works at Farcaster, by the way. It's kind of reconnected, which is great. But like there was like a contingent of people at the company who were like, Ethereum is actually the future of crypto and it's interesting. And we ended up adding Ethereum. Like we made the decision to add Ethereum, and that was like a big deal for us. We added it in I think the spring of 2016, and then of course immediately after we added it, Ethereum network has a hard fork, the DAO, right? Which again, like ancient history at this point. But I don't think anyone immediately was like, oh my God, this is the future. It was just more of like we started to shift to say, hey, we can't be all in on this Bitcoin thing. We have to actually split it. And that ended up being extremely prescient for us because 2017 Bitcoin and ICOs took off, and kind of we had become the best place to buy Ethereum in the US, and that was like a really important decision for the success of the company because the company obviously grew about 100x over year from 2016 to 2017.
That was also a really exciting time, I think, because it was, for me at least, the first wave of like, there's this thing, Bitcoin, that's sort of a new type of internet protocol that can hold value and hold state. And it does this one thing, but like, maybe we could make protocols that do other things, like Ethereum being the first kind of big one, but then everything like Filecoin and, sort of people started to think about you could maybe protocolize all the things. And there was like an early wave of that in that 2015, 16, 17, 18 timeframe that I feel like was pretty mind expanding for people who were interested in building for developers and had a vision for what protocols could become, and that we might be able to have a shot at making new protocols.
Yeah, I think if I reflect back on that period, I agree. It was quite exciting. And I remember Joey Krug, who was working on Augur, kind of like the first prediction market that you could reasonably build on chain. And I think Polymarket has kind of taken it to the next level in terms of like actually being usable. And stable coins actually were a thing that didn't really exist on Ethereum at that point. And so, that's one of the unlocks. But I think the two primary things that why 2017 was too early for a lot of these projects was one, the infrastructure just wasn't there, right? Like Ethereum was, cheap and easy to use relative to Bitcoin. But then as soon as there was some amount of demand, like Ethereum was just not ready to handle the bandwidth of like internet scale applications, even at the time, right? And then I think the second thing was the regulatory uncertainty, which it's funny. Ethereum kind of happened during the first Trump administration, but they didn't care about crypto, right? It was not really on their radar, but there was a bit of a hands-off approach for the most part. And so a lot of that stuff happened. And then towards the end of the administration, the SEC started to get a little bit more aggressive. And then obviously the next administration, things went kind of crazy. But I think that the regulatory uncertainty plus the fact that the infrastructure literally just like could not handle anything reasonable meant that we had way overshot the
Right.
capabilities of stuff. Which the irony is today, the infrastructure is way ahead of the apps, right? It's like block space is abundantly cheap.
Yep.
And regulatory clarity, which has been always a dream in crypto for the entire time I've been here, is like, okay, Genius Bill is on the 1 yard line. And market structure, which comes later this year, seems like it has a reasonable path. So now we're in a reverse situation where we're actually limited on a talent basis. And not to say that people in crypto today aren't talented. It's just we need that many more people building interesting ideas. And you know, we were having that conversation at the beginning about, you know, people you're talking to thinking about coming into crypto for the first time with real businesses and customers, and they're seeing the kind of power of this stuff. But I think it's kind of wild to think that like if the regulatory was there, we still probably wouldn't have had it on the infra, but maybe it would have happened a little bit earlier. But it's like actually now is the first time we're ready on the infrastructure and regulatory side for some of this stuff to actually work.
Yes, and the ideas, the ideas that people are taking forward today, decentralized social, DePIN, stablecoin finance, on-chain finance, user-owned identity, you know, sort of personal data encrypted to yourself, like new forms of privacy, zero knowledge, all this stuff. Like these were all things people were talking about in 2015 and 2016. But to your point, like every attempt to build it, like didn't quite work because the infrastructure was too clunky. And then, you know, there was this real regulatory headwind for, you know, a bunch of years. And that's completely different now. Well, what I'd like to do is, so when did you guys finish your time at Coinbase? And then when did you actually start on Farcaster?
For me, it was October 2019. I think Dan was a good 6 months earlier, and I think we started working together on ideas in October 2020. But it wasn't until maybe January 2021 that like the proto Farcaster idea was something that we actually picked up and we're like, this is the direction we want to go in.
Fun fact is the original name for Farcaster. We talked about this concept RSS Plus.
Remember this, yeah.
But the original document that we started sharing around with people was the AT protocol, which another group has actually since named independently. But that was like what we were, you know, as a placeholder, just like.
I had no idea that you came up with protocol as an independent. Like
I actually have a hash of on an Ethereum block to like, because I was like, I want to make sure I coined this, so I can actually prove I had a doc that compiles to that at that point. But we ended up using something that was actually more mainstream sounding and just call it Farcaster, which that's been a long twist and turn in terms of how we've done the naming. But yeah, and that's actually Varun. Varun came up with it. We've had some kind of interesting attempts at naming, but like Farcaster was like one of those things. He threw it out when we were kind of doing name. I was like, let's do it.
I mean, as all naming exercises go, we spent like a week agonizing over various different names. But Farcaster, I think, came from this line of science fiction novels in the early 90s that I was a big fan of. I'd read in high school. And I just happened to finish rereading them right before I started talking to Dan. So the name was fresh in my mind. And it was just a cool word. It was optimistic. It was like this teleportation technology that connected people across different worlds. And then it was also just named well. We could get the domains and all of that stuff. So I think we ended up choosing it over everything else that we had.
Was there a close second?
I actually don't even remember that. I'm sure we still have the Notion doc. We were pretty good about saving most of that stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there was one that we were organizing over. At one point, it was obvious that this was the name that was just clicking the most, and we went with it.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned with this company is names matter, but they also don't. And I think like there's a version of it is like people way over rotate on names. I think you want something that's good enough, easy enough to say, memorable, fine, and then just move on. Because I think like anyone who thinks that you have to get the perfect name, it's like Airbnb is not the perfect name. And the only reason you think Airbnb today sounds good 100%. Is you've heard it 1,000 times. You've probably stayed at one. You have a preconception of what that brand is. But if I was to go tell you, I mean, the original name was Air Bed and Breakfast, right? So it was even worse. But yeah, I think same thing with Google. Google, like,
exactly.
If I just showed up and said Google to you in 1990, you would have been like, what? Like, is this like a band or like? So I think that is something that, and I've noticed because we get a lot of feedback on a lot of different things using Farcaster, is like people are very focused on like, oh, you have to have the perfect name. That's the key. And it's like, no, I actually think like the name is whatever your product that you put in market and how people use it and feel it, like that's going to be ascribed to the name.
I couldn't agree more. And also very hard to feel that way in the moment, right? Where at the beginning, all you have is a name. So it's even more important as a result. So as you guys were, in this time period, 2019, 2020, thinking about, protocols like RSS and improving them using, ideas coming out of crypto, we talked a little bit about what was going on the crypto side during that time period. What about on the other side, kind of on the social side, right? You got Twitter, you've got Facebook, and then you've also got, sort of Mastodon and, that the prior attempts at kind of more open versions of social networks. Like what was on your mind more on that side of the coin at the beginning?
I mean, from our standpoint, it was actually quite contrarian in that I think it's harder for people to potentially remember this because I think so much has changed in 5 years. But in 2020, 2021, Twitter run by a completely different regime. Right, it was a public company, different CEO, different leadership team. Like the idea of like making it a protocol was kind of there. And I know that there was like a chat group internally, basically in a group chat. Like that's the story of Bluesky. Like that wasn't a serious kind of, and in a world where Elon doesn't acquire it, I think it would have gone way slower and, just it's classic corporate stuff. And so I think the only thing that it really existed was Mastodon. And it was like kind of a curiosity for people. And I think our view was, this is a kind of like stagnant company that is sitting on top of an amazing social graph and potential development platform. If we go and keep our head down for the next couple of years and deliver on building a protocol, there are a bunch of people in the world who would be excited about using a protocolized version of Twitter. Like that was actually the focus. It was not a let's go focus on crypto. And we were actually using the kind of initial architecture, crypto, as this very practical tool. It's an extremely useful database if you think about it for managing kind of like your identity, right? Like at the low levels of a social network, it's like a public and private key can represent you. You can actually have write access only to your row. Like there are really nice properties of a smart contract on a blockchain for this. And you can actually minimally do stuff on chain. And then the rest of the stuff, we can talk about what we built there. The interesting thing was like Elon shows up in 2022 and he completely changes the market, right? So now all of a sudden you have a bunch of interest in a lot of these things. And then the other thing that happened in 2022 is FTX happened. And I think, so there's this kind of like 1-2 punch of, there are a lot more people building in decentralized social. And there were a bunch of other companies that got funded and they've already since shut down. And then I think that Threads also shows up to the market, right? And then they've been able to bootstrap this thing, which has hundreds of millions of users because of the Instagram graph. And so very dynamic market all of a sudden. And then we're the ones building on crypto. So then it's like, ooh, crypto, I don't know if I want to use the one that touches crypto. Even though I think a lot of the stuff that we're doing with crypto is like, actually, this is like a better user experience, or this is novel, like, all the stuff that we do today with stable coins. But I think we've had to since figure out a new direction for like, what are we building and who are we building for?
It's interesting to look at that group of projects from that time period, because I think Bluesky, came up as an idea right around 2019, 2020. And then fast forward a little bit to like Musk taking over Twitter, and then a lot of exodus, out to Mastodon and to Bluesky. One of my beefs with the Mastodon approach always had been the way that they decentralized too much, right? So they've had too many different forms of identity and too many servers, right? And I remember when you guys first started on Farcaster, Varun, you wrote this paper. I think it was called a sufficiently decentralized social network. I forget if that was exactly the word, but the idea was to just decentralize just enough in just the right place that you get the benefits of decentralization without too much decentralization. I think I've always thought of Mastodon as decentralizing in the wrong places, and the Farcaster approach with a single identity, Bluesky takes a similar approach too, as being, far superior, still decentralized, but logically centralized around identity in a really important way.
Yeah, I think our kind of relationship with decentralization has changed over the years. And like what we started with early on was um, we knew that the Mastodon approach was not quite the right one because it had a lot of UX challenges. There was too much
Mm-hmm.
of like, which server am I on? My username is really long. There are also too many rules between servers. And so we kind of started with one slice where we said, okay, it's really important that the namespace or usernames are actually, single state. And this idea of single state or global
Mm-hmm.
state, that actually may be one of the first things we pulled from blockchains, where there was this magic moment when, I ran a Bitcoin node back in 2014 or 15, and it was like, oh, you have literally everything you need that has ever happened on one machine by running one binary. And it was like, well, if you can do this for financial data, why can't you do this for social data? And that was an interesting change, right? Because until then, everyone was like, decentralization means federation. Like you have to have different
Right.
servers. You'll never get everything in one place. There's protocols and all of this stuff. And so bringing identity to global state was the first thing that we did. And we went, wow, this is really cool. Everybody has the same username. They're the same server. They can log in on any app. And I think over time, we actually applied that to user data as well, where the earliest version of Farcaster, and this was around for maybe 3 months, was like, hey, you could run your own Farcaster server and share the same identity space. So different from Mastodon, but still the data layer was sort of separated across servers. And I think we quickly realized how many problems that would create at scale when there were different apps and one like changed its format slightly or like did something new or different. And we said, actually, no, it's important to bring even the data layer and consistency and this beautiful property that Bitcoin and Ethereum nodes have, which is run the binary, get everything. That's actually the developer experience that we want. And that's going to enforce a good user experience because then developers will always show the same thing no matter what network you're on. And so that ended up being our approach to decentralization, which is the important things to decentralize are access to the raw data and access to identity. But you want
Yep.
to decentralize it almost strongly in this global state kind of way versus weakly across like, hey, it can be spread across 10 different servers and you have to talk to all of them to figure out what's going on at any point in time. And that's kind of been the underpinning of like Farcaster identity and decentralization.
I think decentralization gets thrown around a lot in sort of a lot of places, crypto circles and protocol design circles, and it can really mean a lot of different things. And I really think this approach of open access to identity and open access to data as like the core principles of decentralization for a social network is just it was a beautiful design choice.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty close to this, but Coinbase Wallet is integrating Farcaster, and that's an app that has millions of existing users, and so they're going to be able to interoperate, permissionlessly. We're helping them make sure that the integration is good, but they have the total freedom to do that, and it will just work. And I think what's important to point out is like, basically, there are a bunch of other decentralized social media approaches, but none of them actually have two significant clients that are actually like well-funded businesses that are going to exist. And
Right.
so what's interesting is like I think we've taken some flack in the past of like the sufficient decentralization post is like it's crazy how misunderstood that is. And it's like, oh, it's only sufficiently decentralized. Like it's like people don't read it, they just take the title, and it's like,
yeah,
Farcaster isn't on chain. Like, I mean, we've heard so many, I just think, stupid arguments around it's like you're not decentralized. When the reality is like the practical reality of Farcaster, give or take a couple months from now where we are, is like it will be actually one of the only social protocols out there that have two significant apps with like reasonable number of users every day that are actually using it. Because I think most other apps or decentralized social approaches basically have one app, right? Like it's just like that's what happens. And so you can talk all you want about architecture, but like until you actually get to a practical level of like, okay, this thing actually does work. And to Varun's credit and the team's credit, you can go to the Docs website today, run a Snapchain node, and like have full access to the network in a pretty short period of time, totally permissionlessly. You just need an internet connection, no cost even. It's just like the data is there and available. And so I think that in many ways, like we've actually delivered on the decentralization stuff that we've wanted. There's still some elements that I think we can improve and continue to grind out. But I think one lesson we've learned there is like, who cares? It's a participation trophy in some ways. It's like you actually need to drive user growth, because that's actually how you get to an actual protocol that matters, is you have enough people using it that it matters and actually creates the flywheel for more apps to want to integrate. So I think that's been if we could give ourselves advice going all the way back, it's like maybe even early on, spend less time on some of the protocol stuff that we did.
Yeah, interesting.
And really try to focus in on, hey, do we have a vector to like really grow users? Knowing that the two of us want to build a protocol. So like, even if we were kind of starting with a centralized thing, could you then go do it? But I mean, it's a bit moot. Like we're past that at this point. But I do think like as people think about building a protocol, focus on how are you going to get users and actually that muscle and mechanic earlier than you might want, because it's much more fun to build the decentralized stuff because you have a lot more control over it, right? Getting users is really hard. And so naturally you want to work on like you procrastinate through doing stuff that's like technically hard that you have control over, but not like the actual most important thing. I mean, I don't know what you think, Varun.
Yeah, I think plus one to that. We spent a lot of time worrying about like the decentralization aspect, which I think turned out to be the easier problem. Like the hardest thing is building something that people care to spend their time on, and then you can, if you have sufficiently good engineers, you can go figure out how to decentralize it.
Sufficiently good and
Yeah.
engineers to build sufficient decentralization. That what's interesting about all that is that I think even though you're reflecting on maybe you could have pushed on the product side more earlier and a little bit less on the architecture, I think people still look at Farcaster as a product or as a protocol that was rather product focused and rather full stack from the beginning, relative to lots of others in this space. Wouldn't you say so?
I think that's totally right. On the dial of like, product versus decentralization, we would have reached where we are a lot faster if we'd moved like
Yep.
2 to 3 clicks here and maintained the same level of decentralization. There were just a lot of false starts where we spent a month or 2 months thinking about a problem that just ended up being irrelevant. And we should have really focused on what are people actually doing and then doubled down on that first.
I'd love to hear your story about what was it like to launch it. You launched, in a very crypto forward way with a sort of a crypto oriented audience. But I'm just curious how you thought about the beginning and growing the network in the beginning.
Yeah, so it was summer of 2021. We went pretty slow and then ramped up. It was still just Varun and myself. So I think we hadn't hired anyone yet. We had interviewed a few people and weren't quite ready for that first hire. I just started doing onboardings. So we had a desktop app at the time, which is weird. It's like we didn't do mobile or website, we did a desktop app. But I would just do Zoom calls with people, and I like started to do a few, and then I started doing them like all day long. And I would come back, and Varun would join some of them, but I think generally I was just kind of providing the feedback of like, okay, we need to improve this part of onboarding or do this, and I was actually crazy enough, and there were no LLMs at this point, which is sad. I was doing some of the coding, which was like never a great idea, but most of the front end and design. But I think we actually had most of the people from our network kind of churned, and then what was interesting is we got a sufficient number of people to do the referrals, just naturally, like, hey, like, can my friend get onboarded or whatever. You had some people just actually, like, we were sending a DMG like URL link around, so like people were sharing it. Some people snuck onto the network. But the interesting thing is actually it was the set of referrals from people who are a little bit more either ideologically aligned with doing something like this, or they had more time to kill, and they were the ones that ended up sticking around. And so we got somewhere between, 10 to 100 daily active users, and we were there for a while. Like, I think in 2022, like at the beginning, like May or so, it's like we were between like 100 to 200 daily active users. So it like took a really long time before things really clicked up. And we still have a ways to go, but yeah, I think if like you had just measured that initial period, those like first 3, 4, 6 months, and you're like, oh, it's not going viral, and just like quit there, like, okay, like that. I think that's another thing, that the mythology of social is that these apps grow insanely fast. And I think there's some truth there, but it's also from a different era when there were basically no competitors for the most part. Right. It's just like, okay, mobile phone. No one's figured out the thing to just like post photos. Like Flickr is the web version, or Photo Bucket or whatever, Smugbug. None of them actually figured out how to do it mobile. Right. And so I think there's kind of like this bias around like, this is how social networks grow, when the reality is, A, there hasn't been a new social network that's like a public social network, since other than TikTok, which we could talk about, there are a few unique characteristics about how TikTok grew, mainly spending $1 billion plus a year in user acquisition. But I think that the other thing is social founders don't even like, there's no like Kevin Systrom tried to launch a new app, like didn't work. It's not like you have like some magic skill set. It's like being in the right place at the right time with the right product and hitting an S curve of like mobile adoption. That timing is really important on that. In 2025, building a new social graph is, I think, really, really challenging, more so than in the past, because most of the low-hanging fruit primitives have been picked off, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like photos. Okay, Instagram got that. You know, text, college friends, short form video, like whatever network that was able to kind of take a new content primitive and ride that curve. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of new primitives. I mean, we've gotten like weird ones like audio rooms. Okay, that turned out it was a feature of other platforms, you know, not its own thing. A photo that everyone posts in 1 minute. Okay, there's some interesting virality of that, but like it doesn't really help you the rest of the day when you want other people to be in the app. So I think that that's been the biggest challenge. And I think we're going back to this idea of like, we are building a protocol. I think it probably created a little bit more stubbornness in the two of us in terms of how we approach it. Is like, okay, we're not just building a social product. We're actually trying to build a protocol here. So it's like, what's the next best idea we have to like continue to grow this protocol? And I think that stubbornness ended up paying off a bit. And again, still a lot of work to do. But I think in terms of like where we are today, it'd been very easy if you judged it through the traditional lens of like, is this a viral social app versus like, no, we're trying to build like a protocol. So we want to take a bit of a longer term view here.
The other force that was driving some movement in social was sort of like politics and exodus, let's say, right? So there was a fair bit of Twitter exodus to Mastodon, to Bluesky. I think that's, if you look at the Bluesky stats, they're kind of tapering down. I think Mastodon never really took off. And what's interesting
to be clear, Mastodon, its protocol is actually doing quite well because Facebook adopted it.
Of course, sure. The protocol itself, yes.
Right. So then the question is, if Facebook is 90 to 95% or 99% of usage of the Fediverse,
right?
Who's running that protocol, right?
Yeah,
so is it Mastodon? Because I mean, they were first, great, but like the primary app in the Fediverse is Threads.
Yes. Yeah. Gosh, I mean that's true. I wasn't even, this is on me, but I still don't really think about Threads very often. And
300 million monthly active users.
Yeah, it's no joke. It's no joke. Well, where I was going with that is that there's the X's use case is sort of one use case, but then the new social primitive, the new like unit of media is another one. I might argue that one's more powerful, and you just went through a bunch of the ones that have gotten big. Well,
can I challenge a little bit on the Exodus?
Sure.
So I think it's something Varun and I have talked about, and only time will tell. But when we were starting in 2020, the only not protocols, but the only alternatives to Twitter were all right wing, right? Because Twitter was left wing and censoring, whether it was Trump or COVID information or whatever, your version, and anyone who was on Twitter who was kind of center to left was like, oh, this is reasonable. Like these are crazy people. And so you had Truth Social, Parler, Gab, right?
Yep.
And I think explicitly we said we do not want to lean into politics because politics, if you go too extreme to one side, you have no shot of getting the other side, and realistically no shot of getting the center. Because I don't think anyone wants to be in a supercharged political environment, like for the most part,
all the time.
And I think Twitter was this unique thing, and to a certain degree, Facebook, where it was kind of a meeting place. So you would get a little bit of the back and forth, but it was because it was a public square. So fast forward, now you have a bunch of people who don't like, Elon and his association with Trump. They go decamp to another social network. Now you're running into the same issue of, well, this, I mean, and the press is covering this. It's not my opinion. I don't really use the network. It's just, is it too left leaning? Is this actually going to not get out of its own way? And then I think that's where you have this challenge is like, I think credible neutrality and this idea of like, you kind of want a place that everyone can associate. Credible neutrality is Vitalik's idea. I think is very much, if you're going to build one of these things for a global audience, it's trying to achieve that. But to your point, one of the best growth vectors in recently, if you don't have a new content
Right.
primitive,
Right.
was to
Is
align
Exodus.
yourself within a political axis or kind of mood affiliation. And so I think that is something we think about, is like, should we have been more explicitly political one way or another as the means of growth? But I do wonder if, like, your unifying reason for signing up for a network is to be anti something else, rather than this kind of idea that, like, you have an optimistic vision for building the future. And I would argue that, like, if you left Twitter because you didn't like Elon and Trump, the average person leaving doesn't actually care about decentralization. And I think that they've run into some of these issues. They're like, I just want a version of Twitter that doesn't have the people I like or don't like. I think that's some of the challenge. And I time will tell on this stuff, but I feel very strongly that the optimal way to grow a social network, if you can do it, is you come up with a new content primitive, right? Because then it's like people just start talking to their friends, being like, "This is the best place. You got to get on this network for X," right?
So let's talk about that, because I think it's actually one of the most interesting things about Farcaster are the new content primitives in it. And most of the new content primitives in Farcaster have to do with wallets and tokens and digital assets. Let's just think. I just think of it, there's a big category of content primitives that no other social network really engages with, which is sort of crypto assets. And it's an interesting one because it's very engaging for those who are into it, and pretty strong a turnoff for those who aren't. So I'd love to get your take on how to thread that needle of, just the same way you don't want to be divisive right, left, how do you think about engaging audience around a new media format, especially one that is also is a little bit politically charged, but also is just like, not universally understood today.
Like, if you look at what makes Farcaster different when you open up the app today, I think there's two things that immediately catch people's attention. One is the fact that there's money, whether it's tokens, USDC stablecoins, or whatever, moving around the ecosystem. And the second is mini apps, which are sort of this evolution of this idea called frames that we came up with last year, which has grown into this like application platform, letting you build powerful new apps within the social feed and taking advantage of the social graph. I think you can think about them in two different ways. The money moving around, or the crypto interactions, almost like a new interaction primitive. They're not necessarily content in the sense that you don't sit and read this stuff before you go to bed. But for the first time, I think there's a new way for two people to interact that's not a like or a reply or something that's just purely social. It actually carries more significance. And I think honestly, I was like more skeptical of this when we started. I was actually like, hey, people aren't just going to send each other money on the internet. That's a weird thing. But it turns out that over time, that's actually become like more and more normalized. And like both, you see existing social networks incorporating money in a big way. Like, I don't think any social network had the notion of like earning on their platform circa 2010 or 2015. Now it's like a very common thing where earning is like a big part of why you're on these networks. But you also see like transactions happening at the sort of user to creator level, like on live streams where people are tipping each other. And those happen in sort of this very controlled, closed environments where there's like a thing that you can buy on Twitch that you can send to creators. And now it's like, okay, the next evolution of that is to actually have a totally programmable way where there are different ways in which people can interact. And there's lots of interesting apps like Noise on Farcaster that's like trying different ways of tipping each other. And so that doesn't feel like a content primitive, but it feels like a powerful new interaction primitive, which is an idea we're exploring.
I think in some ways, certain crypto assets are content and interaction, like, NFTs and other things are seen more like content. But I think you're totally right. It's more about there's new moves in social that has crypto assets, and it can power new engagements, new ways of like working together or socializing, basically.
Yeah, I think that the other thing that is like the important thing to emphasize here is, because the whole thing is actually programmable, the whole stack, and you have a strong assumption that everyone has a wallet. I think it's a canvas for other people to be able to play around with, right? Like, some of the most successful things on the network are stuff that we haven't explicitly come up with. There is no other social network. Actually, the irony is the best features from Twitter were come up with by users as conventions in the little 140 character, the retweet RT, and at replies weren't initially native. So there is this history there. But I think more importantly, because the whole thing is permissionless, you actually do have people playing around with crypto assets in interesting and novel new ways. Like degen was a totally permissionless initiative prior to like a lot of the sophistication that we've since built into the app now, right? Like we didn't have embedded wallets or any of that. And massive wealth creation event, by the way, for a bunch of people who participate in that ecosystem. So it really gives you this term like magic internet money. Like it's like people, there's some great anecdotes of like people being able to like pursue their dream of becoming a full-time artist because they just happen to be on Farcaster participating in this, tipping mechanism effectively. But like, so you have this like crypto is weird. And to your point about polarizing and like a thing called degen just sounds bad, right? Like in terms of like, if you don't know anything about it. But if you actually go look at a bunch of how this has impacted a bunch of people's lives in a way that they were like, I was just hanging out on this social network with meeting some friends and like the course of my life has changed, or I am now, pursuing something that's more fulfilling in my life. I think we're just scratching the surface there. And there have been a bunch of other, smaller examples of that within Farcaster. But this ability that's like, everyone has a wallet, the whole thing's programmable. Money can fly around at the speed of internet and isn't actually programmable. Like these are things that it's like, oh, this is interesting. Like this feels more Web 2. And this like idea of like remixes and mashups and APIs, which basically hasn't existed for the last 10 years, right? Like in this world where all of our social networks are these monoliths, where they are the monopoly on the client, there is no API, so I'm excited about that because it genuinely feels contrarian and weird. Whereas I think that the AI stuff, obviously extraordinary in terms of like the amount of productivity and just like the rate of innovation. But it's a little disappointing that like basically all of the big AI advances are from a handful of extremely well-funded labs. The big incumbents are very good at it and disproportionately probably benefiting. And yeah, you have these success cases like of a cursor or whatever, but it wasn't like kind of like a revolution of little guys. It, for the most part, is a sustaining innovation. And I just always keep looking at crypto as like this still feels like the frontier of where disruptive innovations will happen. Now, stablecoins are potentially the first thing in crypto that now that they're going to be regulated, feel like big safe companies can actually come in and disproportionately benefit from. But the Wild West of the stuff that people do on chain, that's still pretty far away from what a big company is willing to take. And 100%. I think it is an opportunity for startups, right?
You can have a system that's open for innovation where there still could be one client, right? Like the Warpcast or Farcaster client has at that time was the main one. But because the content feed was fully open, anybody could write, essentially have open season on a content API and say, oh, if you say this in your comment, I'm going to write a bot that picks that up and sends you tokens based on it because I know that you have a wallet address. And so that level of like openness to and buildability is I think a really interesting one. Like crypto is for builders, for indie builders. It is like the indiest part of the indie web right now, where AI is not that in most ways. So,
which, by the way, the irony of what I think of as the Mastodon and Bluesky ecosystems is you have a lot of people who self-identify as that,
right?
But they literally are playing like the way they think about monetization is like, oh, App Store or like accept credit cards, or it feels very traditional versus. And to be clear, I think crypto has done a really. I mean, this is not a monolith, right? It's just like as a category in an industry, done a bunch of stuff that turns people off from it. But like, if you actually know where to look, like it is the place that the like kind of open-minded tinkerers and indie people are like, oh, I can do this thing, or like I can issue an NFT and like you can remix it over. And this is, I think, the ethos of Ethereum that is most appealing to me. Sure. I think there's actually a bunch of stuff in Ethereum that is like, okay, maybe this is a little too much purity test here. But I do think that the ethos of Ethereum that is really kind of like magical is it feels like that experimenting, tinkering part of the internet that we lost for a bit. And I do think you do have a bit of that in AI today outside of the big labs, just like the vibe coding and tools like that.
Totally.
But I do think that like that does exist in crypto. The problem is the headlines just get so focused on prices and trading and whatever that it's easy to miss.
How important do you think it is to soften the sort of token forward or crypto forward or money forward nature of the experience. Because it's like this delicate balance between wanting to take advantage of the superpowers of your, the fabric without it feeling off-putting to newcomers. So how do you think about that challenge?
I think early on, we actually were pretty dialed in to one extreme on saying, hey, the thing we want to do is make crypto completely invisible. Like, this is just a social
Yep.
network, and we'll just make it super easy to sign up and come in and use the app, to the point where we even abstracted away Ethereum. Like, if you signed up for Farcaster and there was an on-chain thing that you needed to do, we actually accepted an in-app purchase, converted it into a crypto for you, executed the transaction, and kind of made all of that very seamless. And I think that was like, look, that was a great user experience, and we were like very excited that we built that. And I think it's one of the reasons we grew faster than like other apps in crypto that needed you to onboard. But I think the honest truth is crypto is not invisible. You can't kind of brush it under a rug and say it's not there. This thing is fun. Like, actually, the movement of money is the interaction primitive that makes this network unique. Actually, the fact that you can have a wallet and someone might just send you a tip or an airdrop is the cool
Mm-hmm.
part of being on the network. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to some extent, I think we have to lean into that, with the caveat that I think in everything that we do, we try to focus on how do we make this as simple for new users to understand and get into as possible, right? Like, there's ways you can build the UI that would be completely off-putting to new people, and there's ways that you can help people come into the ecosystem and go from, I don't know anything about crypto, to I have USDC, to I now have ETH and Solana and understand these ecosystems. That's more of a soft graduation versus thrown into the corner.
Yeah, I think that the other big thing for us is stable coins, and cheap L2 space just makes it really easy for us to do a bunch of stuff. Like, we use stable coins for our weekly rewards. So you can kind of think of it as like the top
Yep.
creators on the network get paid out. It's just really easy for a newer person to crypto to get paid in dollars, basically, but it
Right.
shows up in a crypto wallet. And now they can kind of send it and use it. They can cash out. They could trade. Like, so it's this kind of like, walk, crawl, run approach. Whereas I think, like, honestly, sending someone for some ETH or Bitcoin or Sol feels, it like fluctuates. It's got weird decimals. Like, there's just actually like it's an intimidating thing. It's easy for people in crypto who've been there for a while to think like, oh no, that's actually
Yeah.
better. There's upside. But I actually think, like, if you're just trying to go from 0 to 1 of like, am I on chain? It's like you want an embedded wallet, not a third party wallet, right?
Yep.
Because it's just like the idea that it's like, in order to get going on this app, please download another app and then go through their side of the work. No, it's like, it should just
Yeah,
work.
that's crazy.
And I
Yeah.
think Privy has done, obviously they got acquired by Stripe, but like, that has been a huge unlock from just like being able to build. And then there are a couple other companies, but I think generally, like, this trend of embedded wallets, I think a lot of crypto purists are like, oh, the fragmentation, this is not good. And it's like, for the average consumer, it's great. It's like that the money is in the app that I'm using is actually
exactly.
a pattern that the average consumer is completely comfortable with. And then I think the second thing is like stable coins is just like, you literally go from 0 to 1 of like, I now have value on chain in a wallet, but I understand it and this feels approachable. Great.
You guys have been at this for almost 5 years now. It's grown a fair bit. You've really built a big community of developers, a really engaged, committed user base, I think. We're sort of at this moment where there's a lot of new primitives at hand, including all these AI primitives. So I always like to come back to this idea of the adjacent possible. So like, what is possible today that wasn't possible 6 months ago, and how does that inform, what you think about doing next for the network?
Yeah, so I think that 6 months ago we didn't have an embedded wallet.
Yep.
And our kind of app platform was, we called them frames, now they're called mini apps, was far more limited. Like, and
Yep.
I think where we are now is you can launch a fully functional web app inside our app, but now you have completely reliable mobile crypto transactions, which to date,
amazing.
Like, there have been some dApp browsers in like wallets, but it just hasn't had the smooth UX. And here it's like, if you as a developer want to actually initiate a crypto transaction on a user's mobile device, it just works. There's no failures, basically, which I think is actually a new experience that has not existed in crypto to date. And I think Base, with their rebuild of Coinbase Wallet, is going to be the second app that does this, and they're using Farcaster. I think the other big thing is our wallet actually supports all of the major chains that people are building stuff on, right? So it's just like we support Base, ETH1, we support Solana, we support Hyper EVM. So the idea is, as a user, you don't even need to think about what chain do I have this wallet,
Yep.
right? But do I have Phantom to support the Solana thing? It's just you see something in your feed, whether that's a mini app, a ticker, or contract address CA, you can just tap and interact with it. And even if you don't have a balance on the chain, like we can do the swap and bridge underneath. So
amazing.
That just didn't exist 6 months ago, and certainly didn't exist the last couple of years we've been building. So we're finally at a place where like the UX for core crypto stuff is really, really good. And still stuff to improve, but I think where AI starts to provide some leverage is, I think, in two areas, and we're starting to see it more on the mini app side. So like vibe coding tools work. People are able to like quickly prototype and build a mini app. I think there's stuff that we can do to like make that even faster. We're not going to go build a replit, but the idea is like you can go use one of these vibe coding tools or your cursor, and then just build a mini app really fast and get it deployed. That's great. So the time from idea to distribution in the hands of users is really, really compressed, right? Because even if you go build a mobile app, you have to get App Store approval. You have to get into, you have to then get where you're getting the distribution from. So Farcaster actually becomes this laboratory that you can take an idea and supercharge it and get it into hands of users and immediately get feedback on it, which is cool. And then have live updates on that. I think the second area, and this is something that Varun and I have been spending a lot of time talking about, is AI video is like a thing, and Veo 3 is really, really good. And it's the worst it'll ever be, right? Like, so it's only going to get more realistic. Like we could probably prompt a year from now a version of this podcast where we could feed in the questions you'd ask. It could go look at what Varun and I have said on the network and probably approximate 80 to 90% of what this is, right? So that's pretty impressive. It's also a little scary in the sense of like, okay, what's real in this environment? Like, do I want authentic video, or the reveal preference might be I just want interesting video? And if actually what consumers want is just like it's funny or it's engaging, I don't really care if it was, organic versus GMO, right? In terms of like done by Veo, but like that I actually think is a big thing, because it's already happening on these other social networks, but in a world where AI actually can help dramatically increase the content supply, you actually might for the first time have like a little bit of a David versus Goliath, where the little guys who are always content constricted, like that's why you lose to the big guys, is they have infinite amount of content. Maybe you can actually significantly increase your content supply with a smaller user base because of some of these tools, to the point where now the average user can actually be entertained for enough time on your network to like actually retain and things like that. So, but I don't think we have figured anything out. It's just like, that's probably the one area that we're thinking about.
I think there's a third area that's also interesting, which we have productized already in some ways, which is models are getting pretty good at understanding context. And so I think like historically, when you wanted to understand what a piece of text was about, you could get some amount of it with natural language processing. You could understand the surface level of what it does. But like we had this interesting moment where Dan took a cast, fed it into a model, and was like, "What's this about?" And it was a screenshot of some like Rust code that someone had posted, and the model comes back and says, "This is about Solana." So it like read the screenshot, looked at the code, realized that it was calling like a Solana Rust library, and then says, "This is about this." So now you can go recommend this to someone who likes Solana. And that just wouldn't have been possible, 6 months ago or a year ago. Like no one would have figured out that that context was valuable. And so it's his ability to pick up on sort of the second or third order things that just didn't exist, that might allow better routing of content from people making it to people who want to read it, which I think again is another superpower. Like we shipped, based on this primitive, we shipped trending topics in Farcaster in like 3 days, which then immediately allows like content to surface very quickly. And it was like one engineer on the team who was very good, but still was able to ship it in like 2 days. Whereas like a couple of years ago, this would have been like a 2-week to a 2-month product to get this up and running. So that I think is something where, again, like the Dan's David versus Goliath point, like you now have smaller companies that can build very, very good recommendation systems and get on par with the distribution and the systems that some of these larger companies have in a much shorter time frame.
I love the like general line of thinking along that line, the David and Goliath kind of angle, and what are the things that could happen here that the bigger networks would resist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big thing for us is it's the programmability, because they don't want to give up control, right? That actually hurts their margins, because any version where you can use other clients means you're not spending time looking at their ads. So that monetization model is very focused on locking things down. I think that the second is money. When you're just bigger at scale, you just have a lot more risk with that. And there are a lot of people internally who would be like, oh, we can't do this or that, or like, whereas you just like, you're a startup, like everyone has a wallet. It's like baked in from day one. It's just like you deal with the challenges of that across the board. It's just like part of building your thing. And so, and then when you mix those two together, it's like programmable money on a network. Like I think a big company that's used to control doesn't like that, right? It's like, we're going to add money. I think X is, known that they're going to do X money. Like most likely thing they're going to do is P2P payments. Like it's the simplest thing. Whereas like giving full programmatic exposure to everyone on X, I don't know if that experiment would go as well right now. I think the big challenge is we need to find a growth vector that we can like actually grow the network. Because I think if we can get 10, 100, 1,000x scale through whatever set of tactics, that is actually where I think a lot of these benefits really unlock, because like we're seeing the glimmers of it today. It's just like, we just need more people in the network that stick around and find it useful. Like I'll give you an example. There's a mini app called MiniWord. It's a miniature crossword, right? So think New York Times crossword puzzle, but it like, generally is, 5x5 or 6x6. It's got a group of very passionate users on the network. And what's cool about it is when you finish it, you immediately see yourself on the leaderboard of like how fast you finished the puzzle against everyone else on the network that's in your social graph. And if you actually think about this, like this doesn't exist. Like Facebook doesn't have apps anymore, but tons of people actually, there's like a whole joke that the New York Times is basically at this point, it's like a cooking app games. Like literally like there are a whole bunch of people who subscribe for the crossword puzzle or whatever, but there is no social network there. They don't have a social graph. And so I know from my parents, like basically the way it works is you fill out you finish your puzzle and then you text your friend and be like, did you finish it? Like, how did you do? But like, it's so obvious when there's like a permissionless social graph for this, that it just like, this is more fun. And like people share their scores or they complain about today I did really poorly, which then provides distribution for the app, which then people click in and then go play the game. And so like small little microcosm, but like that is genuinely a better app because they were able to tap into a social graph, but didn't have to do the cold start problem of like, hey, I'm MiniWord, now I need to go build a giant social graph. It's just not going to happen, right?
I think mini apps is going to be a really big unlock because you're giving people yet another surface area to distribute through this open social graph that has all of these properties. And social games have always been fun. Games also have an ability to abstract some of the crypto primitives too, in a way that makes them make more sense. I think you're onto something, and I think it fits with this sort of crypto aspect as well as the openness aspect. So this morning on Farcaster, I said I was going to have you guys on, and I asked people to suggest questions. So I'm going to do a couple of those. Noah mentioned the plywood tweet room. What was the plywood tweet room?
I mean, Noah is pretty famous because I think he's FID 4 or 5. So I know Noah a while. And then there's another guy, Jonathan Lebov, who used to work at USB. Yeah. And they like felt like the right kind of people to tinker around with a network that was literally me and Varun. And so it's a little bizarre because like at the time, I was doing more of the casting than Varun, but it was literally just like my stream of consciousness on the network. I basically was casting like I do kind of today. We didn't have quote casts, so it's just like me putting stuff out there. there were no at replies, there were no notifications. So I think Noah's probably just referring to like, I mean, he says, I'm looking at the cast here, the early feed. I mean, the early feed was me.
Right.
I don't even know what the plywood tweet room is.
Yeah. There was a good era where anytime I said something that was even marginally funny in the office, Dan would be like, "You have to cast that now." So you need like one more to fill up the feed.
Yeah, like there was a good period where I was like, if I don't cast like enough today, the network will die. Like it's like literally people will be like, today is the day that I think this thing is too boring. Goodbye. So I was like, I need to cast more.
I think you've done an exceptional job of that, and you still do to this day. And I get a steady stream of your notifications of casts on my phone, and it brings me back all the time. So thank you, Dan. Here's another question from JRF. What strongly held opinion has changed the most over the course of building Farcaster? I like that one.
I think for me, it's we had a strong belief that other clients, like that was the key to growing the ecosystem. I think that was incorrect for a couple of reasons. So it's 2025. So I grew up in this era of like Twitter, Tweetbot, like TweetDeck, like all these like third-party clients. They didn't even have a mobile client, right? It's like this is kind of this glorious, like, oh, anyone can go build this, right? I think it's 2025. Like the time spent is the game. It's a zero-sum game that you are competing with people's time for is like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, right? And the amount of work to even get to a close enough baseline to those apps is so extraordinarily high 100%. That consumers, like any of the little paper cuts for the most part, they're just gonna bounce. They're gonna go to either the other better client in the ecosystem if they care about that network, or they're just gonna go do something else completely. And I think it took us a really long time. We were very fortunate to have some early hires who were extremely strong mobile engineers. But I mean, even now, like I think like there's a lot of stuff that we could still go improve, and like our app doesn't feel as snappy as it could. But the idea that like you as an indie developer, one person in 2025 can even go approximate, it doesn't compute. And I think like I was too focused on like Lauren Brichter pulled a refresh, invented it with Tweety, like one guy, like this can happen. And I think it may change with AI getting better and better. Like as this stuff improves. But at least when we started this in 2020, I think one of our core things was like we need other clients. That's how we're going to grow the network, and it hasn't. And no blame to the other people. It's just getting users is really hard, and getting to a level of performance that people are going to want to continue to use that app, especially on mobile. Like the other thing is devs love building web because they're on their computer all day. 85% of our usage is mobile. Like that is what consumers use, and so I think that's a big disconnect. So that's been a big update in my prior of like, I used to say mobile first, and now I'm just like, what are you doing if you're building consumer and trying to build desktop? And I think the second thing is like expecting other people to build really polished clients, at least in a near term when the network is subscale, just feels silly. Like we're 5 years in and just now we're getting Base and Coinbase wallet coming into the network.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is those are big clients, right? They're not small startup. It's not the sort of Tweety, TweetDeck kind of thing. It's like it's a big integration with a big player.
Yeah, it's like a 50-person engineering team for 6 months is working on this. And so it's like this idea that you are going to do it is like one or two people. I mean, can people do it and have people built some apps that I think have users? Yeah, for sure. Like good on them. But I think one of the like core premises of doing this was like, let's get back to the Tweetbot era. And I think that era is kind of over. And I think what you need now is either AI superpowered small teams or big investment in UX. And then this is where mini apps come in, because then the idea is I can build a unique, interesting experience while getting distribution in kind of these bigger apps. Varun, did you have something that you've changed your opinion on?
Oh man, lots of stuff. But maybe the most recent one that's comes top of mind is text versus video. I think for a while I'd been like pretty opinionated to a point on like, hey, we're building this place where people are talking. Let's actually really focus on text and win in that before taking on video. And I think the assumption there that has changed is video was always in my mind expensive to do, not just from like a technical perspective, but from like content moderation, routing, recommendations. There's just a lot of stuff that you have to go build and get right, which is just like a very, very large bet. And doing that in a way that was also working in a decentralized context was just like an extremely large undertaking for a small team. And Dan was actually the first to push on this. And I think what's changed my mind now is one, it's very clear that like with AI generated video, like AI is actually funnier at creating video than text, like by far. Like I actually think it's going to win
Mm-hmm.
on making good videos
Yeah.
before it can write good tweets. Um, and two, on the moderation side and recommendation side, I think AI is also going to supercharge the ability to filter, recommend, find the types of things that you care about. And you're not going to need an army of like 500 people looking at stuff. You're going to be able to do that much more efficiently. And so it seems like end users, not just like professional video creators, are going to be able to make funny stuff much more easily. And so that is like a direction that we are slowly making improvements towards.
Yeah, and one other thing that we've learned that maybe is true or not, but I think both of us have an opinion on is it's interesting is like text in a social network like Farcaster or Twitter, the half life of that content's interestingness is
Yeah.
so low,
Yeah.
and it can literally be the same thing, but there is actually this like bias that people have that if it shows like this was 2 or 3 days ago, even if it's somewhat evergreen,
Yeah.
people are just like the algo is broken. This is weird. I'm here because they're trained on Twitter is like I want to see
Sure.
the most like current and relevant, like tap me into the global pulse, right? Video, you can show someone a video from 3 months ago. If it's funny, it's funny. I think the shape of video content today is so much less like to the moment because there
Right.
is a higher production cost. Now, AI video could change that. But like if you've been following any of the like recent world news, like there's a lot going on right now. Like when you tap into the Twitter following feed, if you're following the right group, like it is just like dopamine, dopamine, dopamine all the time. You can't get that on a video network, right? It's just like the text is so much faster there.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, okay, but that's actually bad for a subscale network because you don't have enough people who are generating that like real time.
Right.
And so there's a bit of like a video actually is this thing where there's a higher tolerance to see older stuff because generally the content is less timely. And so I think that that's another like it feels more obvious if you explain it afterwards, but like it takes you a lot of pain and learning to realize like one example is like I was like, oh, we have so many good recommendations on Farcaster over the history of this network. Like someone's recommended the best, whatever kitchen gadget, or people don't care. Like if it's like old, it doesn't like showing it. So it's a bit of like like you can't actually get some of the best parts of Reddit, which is primarily, for me at least, I navigate to via search engine, or now maybe increasingly LLMs, versus like seeing it in a feed. And I think something that feels like Twitter, it's like the modality there, people like, they really just want to see the stuff in the feed.
Yes.
And so you actually run into a bigger content supply problem.
Okay, last question from the crowd, from Tim Riley. Top decision that was super painful to do at the time, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, this one's, I think, easy for me. Well, it was a painful decision for both of us. I might be stealing Dan's thunder, but moving away from encrypted messaging, I think was like a big deal for us back in the day. Like Dan and I both, like one of our first times that we like talked to Coinbase was we were talking about like encrypted protocols for sharing data, and we actually like there was this hackathon project that we built that was for sharing secrets via Slack and all of this stuff. So we were very, very bullish on like identity, encryption, privacy, and we started Farcaster with a very, very strong POV on building encrypted messaging. And I think the thing that we quickly realized was that encrypted messaging is actually very, very hard to get right, and B, like 10x harder to get right in a decentralized context where you actually want other people to have access to that. And what we ended up with was this product that was like technically very impressive and built on a lot of cool stuff, but wasn't what our users wanted. And we were just sinking massive amounts of time into getting what was just a basic feature of a platform. And there was a day that, I think we had sort of galaxy brained ourselves into being like, this is important. Like, how could anyone build a product without this? And we just went out and talked to users one day when we were like, okay, we don't think this is going to like be doable with the team that we have in the time that we want it to be done. And like 90% of people were like, yeah, I just use Signal whenever I want to do something important. I'm just here to catch up with other people and talk to stuff. And like, sure, if you eventually do this in the future, that's cool. And so I think that was like a very, very painful cut, and we argued about that for so long. And every time we were like, "Oh, I really don't think we should do it." And then finally we did it, and it was like a breath of fresh air. And we're very bullish on like we want to do that in the future, and it will be an important part of the protocol. But did it need to ship in 2022, 2023 Farcaster when like the big thing we're focused on was growth? And the answer was no.
Yeah, plus one on that, and I think just generally a lesson there. And we're still not the best at this. Like we're getting better, but knowing when to like kill features. One thing I would push consumer startups is like they should kill more features than they do, because it's like there's this whole loss prevention thing.
Sure.
And like naturally 5 to 10% of users are going to use any feature that you ship, and then
Yep,
that's
and complain about it
important
if
to
you cut
them.
it. Yep.
And I think that like that, oh well, we just can keep it for that group of people, is you create a lot of debt, but not just like tech debt, which is what everyone likes to talk about. You create like
Concept debt.
just complexity in your product.
Yeah.
And you quickly lose perspective, is like when new people come into the app and there are like hundreds of different little like knobs and things, and it's like, no, actually, like it's almost like what you want to do is like, okay, for everything you ship, like you remove 2 things. Like it's just like keep it as simple as possible, because if you actually get to the right core thing, that is the thing that will drive the app. And I TikTok, there is something very magical about if you remember what the 2019, 2020, early 2020 version of the app was, there was no sign up. It was literally you would open up the app and it would go into the feed.
Yeah.
And then now obviously it's a much more at scale and doing all these things, but like there is just like this magical component of like just get to the core thing and see if you can actually, you need push notifications. Like that's another, I hate push notifications for most apps, but then it's like when you're in consumer socials, like it's literally the lifeblood of your app. But like get to the core of what you're trying to do, and that's like what you should be focused on. And I think it's, especially in a network where people can talk back to you in a good way. You have this like loss prevention of like, people are going to be mad if we do this, and they survive. And if you actually have good justification and you keep making forward progress, like people are fine with that.
Well, I think we've covered a whole lot of ground. We could go on for a lot longer, I'm sure, but I really appreciate your time. This is a story that's not finished. I think we're just in the early middle innings here about what's possible, and about what this architecture, what this protocol, what this set of forces and affordances can make possible. So I'm really, really excited about it. And it's really awesome to hear your story of how it came to you and how you're thinking about taking it from here. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Nick.